Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. It is Thanksgiving week, a very consequential holiday in some ways. It's interesting how the whole we had this wonderful dinner with the Indians and then we killed them all narrative. You know, I mean, Columbus Day, we talk about that a lot, right? But not so much on Thanksgiving, and frankly, I think that, you know, there's nothing wrong with bringing it up from time to time, but one of the things that I'm real happy about for Thanksgiving is that we're back in Portland, and all three of our kids live here, and Louise's mom and brother both live here, and it's just great being with family, and, you know, without having to travel to be with family, so I'm very grateful for that. You know, what you're grateful for, feel free to let us know. One of the things I'm not grateful for is what the Republicans are doing with regard to the tax bill. And Forbes, of all publications, Forbes published a piece by a contributor, Forbes contributor. It's obviously his opinion, not Forbes's, but still Stan Collender. Just give you a couple of quotes from it. The headline, of course, is GOP tax bill is the end of all economic sanity in Washington. This was published yesterday at 7 a.m. in Forbes magazine. He says, Stan Collender says, if it's enacted, the GOP tax cut now working its way through Congress will be the start of a decades-long economic policy disaster, unlike any that has ever occurred in American history. Now, I absolutely agree. And I want to share with you in just a second what Bruce Bartlett, who was the economic go-to guy for both Ronald Reagan and for George Herbert Walker Bush, during both the Reagan administration and the first Bush administration, Bruce Bartlett was, you know, one of their principal economic advisors. And he's saying essentially the same thing that this column in Forbes is saying this morning, which is that this Republican tax cut bill is going to crash the economy. But there's a caveat, there's a but associated with it in Bruce Bartlett's world. And I'll get to that in just a second. But back to this piece in today's Forbes, Stan Collender goes on to say there's no economic justification whatsoever for a tax cut at this time. The U.S. gross domestic product is growing. Unemployment is close to 4%, below what is considered commonly full employment. Corporate profits are at record levels, and stock markets are soaring. It makes no sense to add any federal government-induced stimulus at all to this private sector-caused economic activity, let alone a tax cut as big as this one. And then he goes on to say the GOP's insanity is compounded by its moving ahead without having any idea of what this policy will actually do to the economy. Now, see, this au contraire. The Republicans know exactly what this is going to do to the economy, and this is part of an anti-democratic, big D Democratic, as in anti-democratic party strategy that the Republicans are pursuing. Now, it may not seem that way right now. You may say, oh, geez, the Republicans, they're giving these giant tax breaks to billionaires. The average person who earns $50,000 or less is going to see their taxes go up, and go up substantially over the next 10, 15 years. But Republicans know that. I'll get to that in just a second. They say, so the piece in Forbes wraps up. In other words, the Republican tax bill may be enacted without anyone who votes for it having any understanding of the damage it could do to our economy. They have hopes, wishes, and prayers, but in reality, nothing beyond the economic equivalent of pagan superstition. No, they know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly why they're doing it, and they have done this before. This is not a brand new game. And this is where Bruce Bartlett has this brilliant piece in The Guardian today. It's titled, Republican Tax Cuts Will Hurt Americans and Democrats Will Pay the Price. And what Bruce Bartlett lays out, he doesn't mention the two Santa Claus theory at all. But the whole shtick here is the two Santa Claus theory. And you'll recall the old two Santa Claus theory that Jude Wanniski proposed back in the 1970s. As I recall, it was 78 or 79, because Reagan was the first president to adopt it. And the two Santa Claus theory was when Republicans are in power, become Santa Claus, be the Santa Claus of tax cuts, give things away to people, and run up the debt. So that when Democrats come into power, you can yell and scream about the debt and force them to shoot their Santa Claus, which is federal spending. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, unemployment insurance, the Children's Health Insurance Program, Obamacare, whatever it may be. These are the Democratic Party's Santa Claus. You know, they're the gifts that they give away. So what you want to do is tie their hands. You want to handcuff the Democrats so that they are forced to pursue a Republican agenda. They are forced to cut spending. They are forced to balance budgets. You know who the last two presidents were to balance budgets? Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. And they did it in large part because the Republicans had set up a situation where they pretty much had to. Now, Bill Clinton at least got to raise taxes to balance the budget, and it kicked off a huge economic boom. In fact, all the empirical evidence that I can find indicates that when you raise taxes, you stimulate the economy. When you raise taxes on rich people, you stimulate the economy, which is the opposite of what the Republicans are planning to do. And when you raise taxes on working people, which is what the Republican tax plan will do, then you depress the economy. Michael Linden this morning, at Michael S. Linden. Holy moly, new CBO report finds that the sneak attack on health care and the GOP tax bill will hammer households making less than $50,000 a year. Absolutely hammer them. And this is how much distribution of changes in federal spending under the proposal, excluding the outlay portion of refundable credits. This is an actual chart from the Congressional Budget Office. And the 2027 number, well, if you make less than $10,000, you are going to be hurt to the tune of $1,900 next year, or the year after next, $5,900 in 2021, and $9,700 a year by 2027. So your taxes are continuously going to go up, and your benefits are going to go down. If you make $10,000 to $20,000 a year, by 2027, you'll be losing $9,700 a year. If you make $20,000 to $30,000 a year, you'll only lose $8,700 a year by 2027. If you make $30,000 to $40,000 a year, you'll only lose $2,900 a year by 2027 under the Republican tax plan. And if you make $40,000 to $50,000 a year, you will only lose $1,180 a year. If you make $50,000 to $75,000, you make $60. If you make $100,000 to $200,000, you make $1,600, and so on. You know, so anyhow, the bottom line is that the top end gets helped. So, you know, what Bruce Bartlett is saying is that he says, and he says it explicitly. He says, you know, why are Democrats and independents can't figure out why Republicans are pushing this insanely unpopular tax bill. I mean, it really is. It's got a popularity rating in the 20 or 30% range. Why would they do it? Bartlett says the answer is the Republicans are pushing the tax cut at breakneck speed precisely because they know they are probably going to lose next year and in 2020 as well. The tax cut, once enacted, however, will bind the hands of Democrats for years to come, forcing them to essentially follow a Republican agenda of deficit reduction and prevent any action on a positive Democratic platform or program. The result will be a steady erosion of support for Democrats that will put Republicans back in power within a few election cycles. And I think Bruce Bartlett is absolutely right. This is the whole strategy. He talks about how 30 years ago, two Swedish economists, Thorsten Persson and Lars Svensson, laid out how this works. It was published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics in 1989. And it was about how one conservative legislator can just destroy the plans of all the progressives. It's because of something called time inconsistency. We'll talk about that after the break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So how is it that the Republicans can get away with saying, oh, Obama doubled the deficit when Obama had nothing to do with that? It was George W. Bush. I'll tell you all about that. And welcome back. Susan in Lutz, Florida. Hey, Susan, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV on the Dish Network. What's on your mind today? Susan? I can't hear Susan. Okay, I'm going to put Susan on hold. I'm just, Joe, can you hear me? Joe in Chicago?
Hello?
Hey, Joe. Okay, so our phones are working. I'm going to put you back on hold, Joe, because you're listening to WCPT. We'll pick you up after the break. Susan, can you hear me? Let's try this again. No, got no Susan. Okay, Susan, call back. Back to Bruce Bartlett. The consequences of the tax program, this is the subhead of the article, the consequences of the tax program will shelve support for the Republicans. But once in power, the Democrats' hands will be financially bound for years. And, you know, Democrats, as I said, were baffled by this. He says, this is why Obama got blamed for the recession and the resulting budget deficits that had nothing to do, that he had nothing to do with originating. No matter how many times the Congressional Budget Office showed that the vast bulk of the budget deficits in his administration were baked in the cake the day he took office, Republicans nevertheless blamed him and his policies exclusively for those deficits. And then he talks about how the George W. Bush administration had one huge tax cut after another. The payoff for this orgy of tax cutting came when Obama took office. All of a sudden, Republicans noticed that there were large deficits and insisted that Obama do something about them right this minute. Obama even joined with the Republicans to slash spending in the 2011 budget deal and put in place budget controls that made it virtually impossible to pursue any positive Democratic initiatives for the balance of his presidency. No wonder Trump won, writes Bruce Bartlett, the former advisor to Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush, a.k.a. Groper. Should Democrats get control of the House and or Senate next year, Bruce Bartlett writes, Trump and his party will insist that deficit reduction be the only order of business. Automatic spending cuts resulting directly from the tax cuts will start to bite, hurting the poor and middle class primarily. Democrats will get much of the blame. And he goes on to say the originator of the pledge, no new taxes, Grover Norquist, planned it this way. He says, keep in mind, no matter how big the deficit gets from the tax cut Republicans are rushing to enact, none of them will ever vote to undo those cuts or raise taxes, except perhaps in a way that, that further burdens the poor, such as raising the gasoline tax. This is because they all signed a tax pledge. Therefore, any deficit reduction will either consist solely of spending cuts or pass with only Democratic votes, as was the case in 1993. So what do we do? Well, Bruce Bartlett says it's really simple. There's only one thing we can do, and that is completely oppose, completely defeat this tax cut. That this tax cut is going to tie the hands of Democrats when they win in 2018 or 2020. And as a consequence, these giant tax cuts for millionaires, billionaires, corporations, doing away with the estate tax, doing away with the alternative minimum tax, all the taxes that really, really, truly rich people pay, just literally doing away with them. This is not going to have a salutary effect on America.